Let's get started. Software supply chain, a hot topic today. And everyone is talking about SBOMs, so let's unwrap the SBOM to understand, measure, communicate, prioritize, and reduce the risk of your software supply chain. So let's look at some stats first. Our cybersecurity teams are getting told by the number of open source software.
Question even before you start off. So when you say SBOM in terms of Qualys, are you saying SBOM of anything running on production, or is it SBOM on pipeline plus production?
Across the board. Correct. So 79% of servers today are running open source software. 96% of first-party software, that means homegrown software, has open source components. And then more than 40% of this software across both third-party and first-party have high-risk factors. That means exploitable vulnerabilities. And if we look at something like Log4Shell, we did an analysis based on anonymized data from our customers. 52% of teams took more than a month to actually remediate, and they were doing actually a good job. So what are some of the remediation gaps that we are seeing when addressing open source software? Why is it taking so long? So first of all, there's no single catalog of all these software components readily available for teams to go ahead and look up all these components across their environment. And if we define SBOM, what is an SBOM? It's a list of ingredients, an inventory of the components that are embedded on the software applications, right? So, and there was, and there's still very limited SBOMs for third-party applications, okay, third-party software. So it's very difficult to get a hand on the SBOMs. And it's also very difficult to actually operationalize your SBOMs from your DevOps team. What that means is to actually ingest and correlate those SBOMs to your actual production environment, right? And on top of that, there was very limited risk assessment being done, for these components in the enterprise, and a lot of manual remediation, and with the lack of business context, right? So let's look at the typical timeline for remediating such vulnerabilities on open source components such as Log4j, right? So on day 0, right, you hear the news. First question is like, where am I running this component, right? And because you're not building that inventory, you cannot really even answer that question. So what teams did is they started to come up with scripts and things to run in their environment to try to collect that data, right? So that was the first thing. After the first week, still news were coming up as there are new versions that are vulnerable. There are new files that you need to check. So it took about a week for teams even to prepare how to actually build that inventory. And then after only 14 days, and by the way, Qualys help our customers create those scripts and deploy those scripts via our custom assessment and remediation agent or as a QID. So we did that effort, right, during that time. But only after 14 days, customers were starting to detect these vulnerabilities and beginning to understand what is it impacting actually. And only after 21 days, they were trying to actually map what is the origin actually of that component. Is it coming with my third-party software provided by an external vendor? Is it provided by my internal team? How can we understand that? And then by 31 days, so the average remediation time, which started at 21 days, took an average of 17 days. So from detecting these vulnerabilities, only after 30+ days, teams were starting to actually remediate these vulnerabilities. And guess what? After 40+ days, still 30% of these vulnerabilities are present in the environment. So what is the lesson, right, that we have learned? And we knew this, but now we are actually starting to, as a community practice, is that software supply chain needs to be proactive and needs to be continuous. So there are some existing solutions. I was talking to a few of you, right, that are using some of these solutions, especially on the CI/CD, like scanning your repository. So there's a bunch of startups that started providing solutions or other tools that enhance their solutions to help you scan your own homegrown applications, right? On the other side, on the runtime, there are fewer solutions, including Qualys, that you can enable our agent to scan all of your software, including the libraries and the components running in production. So there's still like different personas and different teams using these different plethora of tools, right? So there's still a silo. And there's still a gap across this architecture. And what are some of those challenges that teams are having, right? So first of all, the repository scanning only covers your internally developed applications, right? And then once that is done, once that is handed off for deployment in production, is very difficult to track actually, and even to track the drift that happened from those builds. On the other side, on the runtime security, these tools, including Qualys, is doing a good job of supporting the major technologies such as Java, Python, Go, to scan and actually look inside your file system, find those libraries, find those files like jars, wars, understanding what are the dependencies inside those files. So they're doing a very good job of scanning, but still there's a lack of correlation to the actual source of that software, like what is the SBOM. So without that correlation, we can determine that the file is there, that the vulnerability is there, but then those 17 days that took for you to actually prioritize, assign the vulnerability, and understand who has the responsibility to fix that still an issue without the SBOM. And the major problem is really the lack of integration between these two areas. So why focusing on SBOM? How can SBOMs can help, right? So an SBOM, really what it provides a proactive transparency, provenance, and a speed at which you can identify and actually remediate these vulnerabilities. And there has been a great effort from NIST to put together a community in the last 5 years, and then it has accelerated tremendously in the last 1 to 2 years. So what we are doing here is, with CSAM, we are now actively working on this solution to help you analyze the entire scope of your SBOMs across your environment. So it's going to do 3 major capabilities. So it's going to provide a single source of truth for all of your SBOMs across your third-party and first-party SBOMs. It's going to help you with continuous visibility of all the components and all of the vulnerabilities of those components across your runtime environment, which is really what matters at the end, what's running on your production environment. And it's going to help you centrally prioritize the true risk of the entire software supply chain with the business and the asset context that is already collected within CSAM. So with this, I'll show you a quick video that we have from our prototype today. So as I mentioned, we are building this. Where is So again, it starts with your inventory. And as you can see here in CSAM, within CSAM, you will have a new tab here, which basically inventories all your SBOMs. And what's interesting here is, out of the box, our CSAM catalog, which already has a lot of intelligence about software. We already tracking the life cycle, as it show you, license categories, et cetera, for the software that is installed across your environment that we detect with the agent and with the authenticated scans. So we're going to add to this catalog, we're going to harvest hundreds of known SBOMs, or we are going to actually scan repositories for known open source projects, for databases, middleware, things that we know that are present across our customer base that you are tracking on your critical assets. So out of the box, without you doing anything, you enable CSAM and you get to see the SBOMs for those off-the-shelf open source applications that have many open source libraries and components inside, right? So you get to, and because that is already, you're already scanning your software, you're able to understand what is the SBOM, what are the components inside the SBOM, what are the assets that have that SBOM or that software, and then be able to understand and track on a daily basis what are the vulnerabilities that are popping up. If there are new vulnerabilities disclosed against those components, they're going to, in a daily basis, immediately be listed, and then the true risk, corresponding true risk is scored. Additionally, via API and via integration, you'll be able to ingest all of your SBOMs from your DevOps team. And even if you have something like a third-party provider that has not a public SBOM, but usually you can request that SBOM, and then you would be able to upload that SBOM in a supported SPDX and CycloneDX formats, which are pre-established formats for SBOMs. This is basically a JSON definition of the SBOM, and immediately you'll be able to understand what are the components. You're able to add your business context. Is this SBOM critical to one of my business applications? Who owns that SBOM? Who supports that SBOM? And then additionally, there's a couple of things you can do. You can correlate the SBOM based on the software that we are already discovering. So in this case, I'm importing a reporting service, an application that my own team has developed, and through an API or through a UI in this demo, we're importing that. So I'm going to map that and tell the system how to find that software within your environment, because it's something that we have, that organization built, right? Another way to correlate that is based on tags. So you're able to scope down and say, this reporting service, for example, is part of my banking application, which is a critical application. And that's how we are going to correlate through the asset to this SBOM. So now that you have your SBOM, you will immediately get the vulnerability assessment. Those vulnerabilities are going to get correlated through our threat intel, the same threat intel that you're getting with VMDR, and immediately you're going to get a risk score or a true risk score of that SBOM particularly, right? And of course, there are some lifecycle management capabilities that you can do here. You can manage the lifecycle. You can assign an SLA for resolution. You can basically give exceptions. You can manage exceptions, and you can also look at basically in this case, I've imported already different versions of the same SBOM. So I'm able to track how my developers are introducing new versions. Are they adding new libraries that are vulnerable, or are they removing, fixing some of those vulnerabilities? You had a question?
So we have this particular use cases where we wanted to run reports of our production environment. In the sense, are there any libraries being used which are non-FIPS compliant?
Non-what, sorry?
Non-FIPS compliant.
Okay.
Cryptography standard basically. Will SBOM be able to do something like that, or?
So think about, with the Qualys solution, right? So think about the SBOM as what is supposed to be there in the software, right? From your DevOps team or even from a third party. This is like a contract. The SBOM this is the list of ingredients, the disclosure basically that goes in a box in a supermarket, right? Then you have you can verify that by scanning using the agent. The agent today already has the capability. When you enable the agent, it has a capability in a different schedule. You can select which agents to enable, and it can scan your entire, wherever you tell it to start, your entire file system. And it's going to look at every file, every library, every dependency, and actually generate all of that data. So you could use that to understand if you're running those files across in production. So that agent is already running in production, right? And it's collecting this. Now, what the SBOM is doing is, before you even run the scan, because this may be like a time-consuming task, right? You need to scan the entire file system. Before you even run the scan, you get to know what is supposed to be there based on the SBOM. So in this case, I'm able to understand the dependencies in a tree view. I'm able to understand the vulnerabilities. And remember, these vulnerabilities, new disclosures happen the next day. So you're able to actually find out that on a daily basis, whether there's a new vulnerability that pop up across my SBOMs, across my components, across my assets. So the next time that you gotta find out whether you're running one of those components, you can simply come to this central view, right? And then search, for example, log4j or any component, and then search for a specific version or a specific range of versions, and then you'll be able to know across all of those versions what are the vulnerabilities, how many SBOMs, in this case 19 SBOMs, have this particular vulnerability that I'm now expanding into. And oh, I see this reporting service 101, which was my older version, and my team hasn't removed that, hasn't upgraded that yet. So I have 8 assets that are impacted by this vulnerability now. And the good thing is that because you're using CSAM, you're able to understand the full scope of what is all the software that is on that asset. Is there any end of support software, any other application? In this particular example, as you can see here, we have the technology name and target path, which is coming from our software composition analysis. So we use that SBOM as a baseline to understand where is all the impact, and then I can actually enable the agent to actually go ahead and scan and verify and find out the target path, which will be necessary for that person to actually go and modify and remediate the vulnerability. So, and because you're using CSAM and CMDB sync, or you're adding your business context via API, you're able to understand that this asset is part of your banking app, who owns that asset, who owns that banking app. And then, of course, now all of these vulnerabilities that have been scanned are part of your true risk scoring. So all the vulnerabilities together with the other vectors that CSAM is providing, and sanction ports, missing software, all of the different controls that may be failing on this asset as part of the risk scoring. And now you're prepared to actually monitor your entire SBOMs across private or first party and third party across the board. And then lastly, because you have all this data, you can also create rules or response rules. For example, you can create a rule that says any SBOM where the risk score goes greater than 800, I can get an immediate alert and then start investigating, right? Because you're not gonna be watching your dashboard all day long. So let me get back to so that was the preview of our prototype. And then, so what is the result, right? So you're able to reduce the software supply chain risk tremendously. Like that detection time that we saw in the timeline for 14 days is almost immediate. Like within 1 day, you get to know where the components are, where the vulnerabilities are. And then because you have all the business context, you're able to triage and prioritize that. Instead of 17 days that takes you today, you're able to do that within hours or few days. And then the end-to-end response really becomes from more than 30 days to less than a week. Because the first 2 stages where most of the customers spend time was actually identifying the component, identifying the vulnerabilities, identifying the context of the asset, and really the last third part of the problem was actually fixing the vulnerabilities. But with Qualys, because if you have CAR, you can actually execute the scripts directly to fix those vulnerabilities, or you can patch if there's a patch available. So as I mentioned this, if you're using CSAM already, good. Now you will have the baseline necessary, and then work with us. We're currently working with a lot of customers, getting their feedback on this SBOM project, and this is going to be available early next year. If you're not using CSAM already, you can sign up for a free trial, start building your inventory, the business context, et cetera, so that you will be ready to onboard your SBOMs. Your SBOM analysis as well. Thank you.